In this video, we're modeling a curved modern villa using Rhino and then taking it into PromeAI's new detail tool for rendering. This feature brings a whole new level of realism and precision to AI-enhanced visuals. If you're working on architectural concepts and want realistic results fast, this tool is a game changer. Alright, so once we are here in Rhino, make sure that you are going to be on the front view. And before we get started, as always, I'm going to be starting off by creating some reference curves, just to define the height and width of our design. So for this, I'm going to be typing in polyline. I'm going to be making sure that the grid snap is turned on so that I can be a bit more precise. So I'm going to be clicking here and dragging the curve all the way over to the side. I'm going to be typing 10, and then for the height, I'll be typing 8. So these are going to be our dimensions for our villa. And in order to make our lives a bit easier, I'm going to be starting off with simple geometries. For this, I'll go ahead and pick the arch tool, but not the one that we have here by default. We're going to be going for this second option, which works by defining 3 different points. The first point, the second point, and finally the midpoint. So let's go ahead and do that. However, I'll be doing this obviously inside my reference box. So I'm going to be starting off with the arch on the middle point. By the way, we'll be creating one at the top, one at the middle, and one at the bottom. I'll be creating one from this point all the way to this one over here. And then by using this quadrant, we'll end up with this type of shape. The second one will be on the bottom left side. So let me go all the way to the bottom over here and end up with something like this. Okay, now the last one. So make sure to just press the spacebar key in order to repeat the same command. So I'm going to start off from this point, and it's going to probably have the same width of the one at the bottom. However, at this point, it might be a good idea if we enable the grid snap to have a little bit more freedom. Now that I have all of my geometries, I'm going to delete my reference box. And what I'm going to do is to use a polyline in order to split or trim all of these through the middle. So this time, I'll make sure to turn on the O snap so that I can snap to the midpoint of this arch. By the way, in order to be able to do so, you'll just have to check if midpoint object snap is turned on down here. And I'm going to be pressing the shift key to activate the ortho tool down here, and let's place it right in the center. Again, create another polyline by just pressing the spacebar key and drag it upwards. And last but not least, we need this one. So what we need to do next is to select all of them with the cell all command. So cell all, and then go ahead and type in trim, and I'll be trimming all of these sides so that we end up with something like this. Again, what we need to do at this point is to blend these curves together. For this, I'll go ahead and use the blend CRV command. So I'll pick this one and this one. And it doesn't have to be perfect at this point because, as you can see, we have some control points that we can later adjust in order to refine our geometry. For now, just make sure that on the continuity option, you have point 1 and point 2 set as curvature. Click on OK, and we're going to be doing the same thing, but with this one over here. So again, blend curve. And there we go. Now we need to go into a perspective view. So I'll double click on the front view. So once on the perspective view, let's select all of these 3 curves and duplicate them by pressing and holding the Alt key. Then just drag it all the way over here and we can delete this one. So you should end up with something like this. But as I mentioned at the beginning, what we need to do now is to blend these curves together. And in order to have a more fluid form, what I'm going to do is just to tilt both of these curves. And you'll know what I'm talking about in just a second. So let's jump into a top view now. So I'm going to be using this control point curve, and I'll use it in order to create that subtle curvature. So something like this, something that slowly starts to curve to maintain this fluidity going on like this. So again, a really subtle curve that goes like this. Something around this point should do. Maybe I should just go ahead and drag this up and just refine this fluidity a little bit. I don't want it to be that harsh. All right, maybe a little bit more, and there we go. And the same thing with this one. I think it's not that subtle, so let's refine it a little bit. Now I've created both of these curves because I want these to follow the path that I've created down here. How can we do that? Well, we can just type in the command curve from 2 views. So that's CRV 2 views, and it's asking me for a direction. So let's click on direction, and the direction is actually going to be on the Z axis. So for me to be able to grab the Z axis, I'll be pressing the shift key. Then it's telling me to select the first curve, which is going to be this one, and then the second one, which is going to be this one right here. So you can see that we've transformed this curve, and now it's actually following this path, which is awesome. It's exactly what we need. So let's repeat the same command by pressing the spacebar, and again, make sure to select the direction and make it on the z-axis. So we need to select this one first, so the path first, and then the curve that we want to transform. Alright, now it's safe to delete all of these curves, so let's go ahead and select them and delete them. And what I'm going to do is just drag them closer to each other. And as you can see, we have so many control points. And if you've been watching our videos lately, you'll know that we have to reduce the number of control points. And we can do so by using the rebuild command. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to be grabbing both of these curves and typing in rebuild. Now, the point count right now is at 19, which is a little bit too much. So I'll suggest to go all the way down to 10. Having less control points actually makes our lives a lot easier. And make sure that the degree level is set as 3. Let's click on OK. And if I select them, you'll see that I have way less control points, which is great. Now for our next step, we are going to be connecting these two curves. But before that, make sure to refine the curve a little bit so that we don't lose that fluidity, that curvature that we have in here. Now, the command that I'll use in order to blend these two curves together, it's going to be blend CRV. So blend curve, I'm going to select this one and then this one over here. However, in our design, we will maintain this curve straight, but only on the x-axis. So again, make sure to have these two set as curvature and then click on OK. Now I'm going to be selecting this curve, and in order to align all of these control points on the x-axis, I'm going to just press this scale icon on my gimbal, and if you cannot see it, make sure to activate it down here. So just press once on the red square and type in 0. Then click on enter. Now we need to align it with our curves. So I'm going to be typing in move, activate the O snap, and grab this point and move it over here. And you can see now that we have a nice fluid form. So for our next step, I'm going to go into a front view again, and look at this. We actually need to fix some points because this doesn't look fluid at all. So let's grab this point and drag it all the way over here. And also I would like to have a more arched geometry. So let's refine it. I'm going to be grabbing this control point and drag it over here. And if we look closer to this right side, we can actually spot some overlapping. So I'm going to be grabbing our curve, and actually let's jump into a perspective view so that we can carefully see which control points we should select. Okay, so I'm going to be selecting this one. Now back to a front view, and let's lower it a little bit. So something around this area should do. And over here, we might need to fix this fluidity a bit. So I'm going to be dragging this control point now to the left side, and I think this looks pretty good. Alright, so now we have to start creating the surface or our actual 3D model. And I'm going to be starting off with the outline, which I'll later just extrude to create a solid. In order to do so, I'm going to grab our curve and type in offset. I'm going to be offsetting this by around 0.7. So just a heads up, if you're new to the channel, we are always working with meters. Now let's go into a perspective view. And in order to create a surface out of our geometry here, I'm going to be using this sweep command. For this, I'll need to create a polyline down here. Again, make sure to just have the O snap turned on and close these curves like this. Now, go ahead and type in sweep 2. And why am I using sweep 2? Because we have two rails. So again, sweep 2, I'm going to be selecting the first rail, which is this one, and then the second one, which is this one, and finally the shape that we want to sweep. So let's just select it and click on enter. I'm going to be ignoring these settings because they're completely fine, so just click on OK. So again, the idea here is to go ahead and extrude this, and now what I want to do is to actually align this face to the y-axis now. So we can select individual surfaces by just using the Ctrl plus Shift keys, like so. Now let's align these on the y-axis by pressing again on this square icon and typing in 0. And there we go. We have aligned our back surface. Okay, and now what I want to do is to create a little bit more of detail. So for this, I'm going to grab our initial curve and isolate it. I'm going to go into a front view again, and I'll be copying it. The way that we can copy objects in here is by pressing the Ctrl+C to copy, and then the Ctrl+V keys to paste it. So if I click once in here, you'll see that we end up with two curves. I'm going to be grabbing the top one and isolate it again. Now what I want to do is to have an additional detail that makes this curvature even more noticeable, but in a subtle way. So I'm going to be again trimming a small part of it through this point. Again, I'm just using a polyline, so I'm going to be grabbing these two curves and trimming them in this area. Let's delete our reference line, and now at this point I can just delete all of these control points in order to be able to control this curve better. So we end up with, again, a more subtle shape. Okay, so now I can actually show all of my objects again by typing in show. And don't forget to refine our shape a little bit more. Remember that this is super important. Okay, so again, just start moving these control points, and there we go. This is looking pretty nice, and we are going to be repeating the same process. So I'll just grab these two curves and isolate them. Now head over to our perspective view, and what I want to do is to create a subtle curvature as we did before, but starting from this mid section. So this curvature will go all the way over here and then meet at this same point right here. So for this, I think it will be best for us to go into a top view, then grab a control point curve, and from this mid section, I can go ahead and just create that subtle curvature. Okay, something like this is looking pretty good. I'm going to go to this view over here. We need to align these control points on the construction plane. So I'll just click once in here and once again type in 0, and then we can just go ahead and isolate these two curves so that nothing else is on the way, and type in CRV2 view. So again, let's define the direction first, which is the z-axis, and we can define first the direction of the path and then the actual curve. Sometimes this option will pop up which says curve extrusion direction. We'll just leave it on the y-axis like this. Okay, let's delete both of our reference curves and show everything. And once again, I'm going to be selecting this outline and then this one over here. So what we need to do at this point is to trim the top one. So make sure to just copy and paste the initial curve in case we need it for the future. So Ctrl C and Ctrl V. So I'm just recycling our first shape. Go ahead and select this one that we just created, isolate them again, trim it, and we end up with something like this. So at this point, what we are going to be actually doing is creating a surface out of these curves. And we can go ahead and use the loft command in here. So typing loft, and there we go. If you see some imperfections on your surface, you can try another tool which is called patch. But patch needs these curves to be closed. So I'll type in polyline and I'll go ahead and close these curves like this. Type in patch and you end up with a clean surface like this one. I'm going to once again show all of my objects to see how we're doing. And so far so good. However, I think we overdid it a little bit with the width of the outline. So I'm going to be taking this curve and this one over here and isolate them again. But in this case, I'm going to use the front view and type in offset, and instead of 0.7, I think I'm going to go with 0.5. Again, let's go back to a perspective view, type in polyline to create our sweep shape, and type in sweep 2. This is our first rail, this is our second one, and finally the sweep shapes, which is this one. All right, now let's show everything again, and we can actually delete this one. Okay, and I'll extrude this one all the way to the back. Then with Ctrl+Shift, we can select all of these surfaces and align them on the y-axis by typing in 0 on this icon. Okay, there we go. It looks a bit better. And it's actually going to be a good idea to extrude the outline of this surface. So in order to grab the outline of a shape, we can type in dot border. So that's duplicate border, and then I'll explode these curves to end up with only this one. And what I'm going to do is to simply grab the ball from the gumball and drag it all the way over to this side so that we end up with this surface on the top. Alright, so now before moving into the windows, I think we need a little bit more of length at the back. So I'm going to be grabbing all of these surfaces with Ctrl+Shift and also this edge that we just created and drag it all the way over here, just a little bit. Alright, so now let's jump into the windows. And the way that we're going to be creating those windows will be with a simple box, and then we'll use our shape to split that box in order to create the shape that we have right here. So let's start with the top one. So let's head over to a top view and type in box and make sure that we are actually covering the whole width of our architecture. So something like this. Now back to a perspective view to see the height of our box. And again, make sure that you are actually covering the whole height and width of your 3D model. Now, because we are actually going to start off with this window on the top left side, I'm going to reduce the width a little bit, okay, to something around this area. Okay, great. So once we are in here, I'm going to, first of all, move this a little bit to the back, okay? And I'm going to be typing in split. And if you look closely, our command bar is asking us for the cutting objects, which is this one. Okay, so now the only thing left to do is to delete the exterior piece of our box, and you can see that we ended up with our window right here. And we're going to be using the same workflow, but for this other side. So let me go back to a top view. And again, type in box, make sure that the O snap or grid snap are enabled so that we can move freely. Now I'm going to be creating the box like so, and then Ctrl+Shift. And I'm going to be leaving this box right here because before doing so, I'll be grabbing both of these surfaces and dragging them down just to close our design like so. So once again, I'll grab both of these surfaces and align them to the Z-axis by just typing in 0 like this. And there we go, it looks nice. So in here, I'm going to just be placing a balcony. Let's drag this box over to this side. I'm going to make sure that we are actually covering all of this area. Again, let's drag it down just a little bit. Okay, and now split. And as you can see, we actually need to move it a little bit towards the interior there because we need to make sure that it's actually intersecting with that piece. So something around this area. Okay, great. So again, type in split and let's select all of these geometries, and there we go. The only thing left to do is to create a slab and a driveway. So let's go ahead and create that ground slab over here. So something like this, not too defined because the AI will be doing the rest. And before we forget, we should add a balcony here. So I'll grab the polyline and I'll activate the O snap so that I can snap it to this end right here and then drag it up by, let's say 0.2. So that's 20 centimeters, and I'm going to be closing this rectangle like so. Now I can go ahead and extrude it all the way over here. And because our thickness is a bit wider, I might need to do the same thing here. So let me just drag this guy all the way over here and let's see our design, but on an Arctic view. Okay, we need to get rid of our reference curves. So we can go ahead and type in Celsius V to select all of the curves, then group them together and hide them for now. Quick reminder, if you want access to all the files from this project, you'll find everything on our Patreon. That includes the finished Rhino model, the Midjourney image and prompt we used to build this design, and even the reference images and lighting prompts for the daytime and dusk renders with PromeAI. You'll also get access to our extensive AI architecture guides, and we're working on even more to help you sharpen your workflow with Rhino, Midjourney, and tools like PromeAI. Link is in the description. All right, so we need a driveway now. So this probably needs to be a little bit closer. And at this point, what I'm going to do is just to bring in a car from the Enscape library so that I can have a better idea of the scale of this. So I'll jump into the Enscape tab and click on the asset library. Okay, now I'm going to be typing in car and I'll go with a sports car. This one looks pretty nice. So go ahead and place asset on the base plane, which is this one. Okay, great. Okay, let's rotate it 180 degrees this way and place it over here. So this looks like our driveway, all right? And you'll see that we don't need much detail on our 3D model because the AI will handle that. Maybe a road. So the road can be just a simple plane. So let me just create it like this and lower it down a little bit. And we can also add a very subtle slope on our driveway. Okay, and I can do this on a top view. So let me go to a top view, type in polyline, and I'm going to just create a polyline that goes through all of my project and duplicate it over to this side. Okay, so I'll grab all of these three objects, go to a perspective view and type in isolate. Okay, great. Now I'm going to be grabbing both of these curves and you can see that now we have this cut tool on our gumball. So if I just press it and drag it all the way down, and by the way, I'm going to go back to a shaded view, you'll see that we managed to cut our geometry. Now again, type in polyline and I'm going to go ahead and cut it through this point now. and lower this edge so that we end up with this nice detail. And maybe we can just add a couple of trees to the side. So let me just grab some trees from the library. So I'm going to be placing these assets right here. Let's lower it a tiny little bit and maybe make it a bit larger. All right, now let's duplicate this several times and then we can just grab these and duplicate it all the way to the back. Awesome. And then the same thing too over to this side. And the last thing that we have to do now is to place our camera. But before doing so, let's enlarge our street a little bit. Okay, so in order to grab a nice perspective, we need to go from perspective to 2-point perspective. And the way to do so is to click on this arrow, then set view and click on 2-point perspective. Okay, awesome. Now we can safely select a view. All right, so something around this point should do. And we can also go ahead and type in properties, for example, and we'll see that the lens length is at 23. We can lower this to maybe 17, and then by pressing and holding the control key while also pressing the right click of our mouse, we'll be able to set up a more interesting camera view. So we can go even lower to something like 15. Let's just close this window. All right, this looks awesome. So we can save this view by going into this arrow again, then set view, and down here you'll see the named views. Let's click on it, and on this camera icon I can press it and I'll just type in front underscore perspective and then click on OK. So I've got my view saved. Now let's change this from shaded to an arctic view, and again let's hide our curves. Remember that they are already grouped together, so I can just type in hide. Okay, and for our final step here in Rhino, we just need to go ahead and type in view capture to file, and down here make sure that the resolution is set at a minimum of 2K. You can increase this resolution by increasing the scale. Let's click on OK and save it wherever you want on your PC. Okay, so now once we are here in PromeAI, we need to go into the sketch rendering tool, and this can be found right here underneath AI tools. So let's click here once, and here we go. Let's click on sketch rendering. So let's go in order. First of all, we need to upload our image that we just created in Rhino, and you can do so by clicking right here and then jump into upload image. Notice that the resolution is horizontal. If you want to end up with a vertical format, for example, you have to adjust the viewport in Rhino for that. Moving on, we have the prompt. And it doesn't have to be a detailed prompt because it's the reference image that is actually going to be given all the detail. So we can be a little bit brief about this. We can write luxury villa with a driveway, comma, sports car. So let's go and see which reference images we're going to be using for this. And the first one is this one. Now, there's a couple of things that I want you to notice. First of all, the type of lighting that we have and the type of materials that are being used. Now, this image was created in Midjourney, and you can find the prompt that we used on our Patreon. Links down below. Another thing to notice is that it doesn't have that much detail on its environment, right? The second image that we'll be using, it's a totally different one. So you can see that it's nice and sunny and that we have a nice clear blue sky. It's a little bit more attractive in my opinion, and we also have a little bit more of detail on the whole environment. This image again was produced on Midjourney, and we actually wanted to focus more on the different type of lightings that we can get. So keeping that in mind, let's jump back into PromeAI. Now in reference image, I'm going to upload our first reference, which is the one that has that dusk lighting going on. Okay, so I'm just gonna click once in here. So once uploaded, we can go down here where we have options, and we have different type of models. Now the difference between V1, V2 and V3 are pretty extreme. V1 is not gonna give us that much detail on our visual, so I don't really use it at all. While on V3, you can see that it will give us a little bit more of detail. However, it has fewer rendering nodes, so it usually takes a little bit more time. That's why I'll always like to go with V2. It has incredible detail and it's super fast. So let's go with V2 for now. Now the style will actually define if we end up with a realistic result or with something more like an anime or conceptual art, for example. The best option here is photography alongside realistic. Now moving on, we have the scene, and obviously we need to go into architecture, and because this is actually a villa, I'll select villa. If you're working on something else like a building or even a skyscraper, you can go ahead and pick them. You can also experiment with other types of scenes, for example, interiors or even landscape design. And if we go down here, we will have the mode. And this is where it gets really interesting. The one that we'll be using today is the detail. This is the newest tool that PromeAI has got for us, and I must say that it's really impressive. If you have seen our past videos, you will know that I usually go for structure, but the detail tool, it's actually a game changer because it not only gives us precise results, but it's really good when it comes to concept design. Because for example, if you have an idea from Midjourney and want to mix it with your current modeling, it's going to be super faithful, as you will see in a minute. And another thing to keep in mind here is that it's going to give us a richly detailed visual presentation. So it really adds a lot of detail, even though we don't have it on our 3D model, but we do have it, for example, on our reference image. And then we have creativity. Now, leaving this at 40, it's going to be a good idea, because if I lower it, for example, all the way to 15 or 20, it's not going to give us much detail, and it's going to be following what we have on our 3D model. That in this case is not that good because we don't have anything on our background, for example. And it's also not going to be looking as realistic as leaving it at something around 40. Now, if we go all the way, for example, to 70 or 80, this will cause the AI to start hallucinating new geometries, and we don't want that, right? So again, leaving it in a range of 30 to maybe 50, it's going to be a good idea. For this example, I'm going to go for 40. Now we also have this negative prompt, which in this case I'm not going to be using, because if I type in stains or dirt or something similar, it's going to take away the realism of our visual. So to be honest, I don't usually use the negative prompt on PromeAI. And because we're aiming for something realistic, we will keep the artistry at 0. Another super important thing is the perspective. Now, if I go in here and scroll all the way down, you'll see that we have even aerial views, bird's eye view, and drone view. If you have any of these selected and you want to actually create a POV shot, this is going to dramatically change your results, and for the worse. So make sure that the perspective that you select in here matches the perspective that you have on your 3D model. In this case, I'm going to go for this ultra long distance, which is great for renders. And last but not least, we have the lighting, and I always go with key lighting. You can go ahead and explore other types of lighting, and honestly, any of these will do, except for the really colorful and sci-fi looking ones. Always stick to realism if that's what you're aiming for. And with that being said, let's go ahead and generate our visuals. Okay, and here we go. Let's start with this first one. It looks great. Let's go and check out this other one. Even better, actually. And last but not least, we've got this third one. So again, I think this is pretty powerful because it has actually taken everything that can be seen on our reference image, which is this one. So we've got wood and concrete, right? And also this dusk lighting going on. And this is exactly what we got in here. So in this way, by using Midjourney and PromeAI, we can go ahead and apply any type of materials that we want to our 3D models. And even the type of lighting. You can also see that the sports car is looking pretty good. Alright, now let's try this other reference image, and you'll see that we're going to be able to change the time of the day and also the materials of our architecture. So I'm going to just press on this X icon and pick this other one. In this case, we can actually see that it's changed a lot of the environment following our reference image, which is great. Let's go ahead and check this other one. Okay, looking awesome too. And finally, this one. Alright, so in this case, it has added a lot of wood and some ideas come to mind. For example, now it can start following this type of window framing that I really like. And it has even added a little bit of extra details such as the handrail. That makes complete sense, right? Now, if I change the prompt a little bit to, for example, glass and concrete facade, we'll get less wood and more glass. And here we go. As you can see, we've got way more glass. But in this case, I think if we reduce a little bit the creativity levels, we'll have something a bit more faithful to our 3D model. I'm going to reduce this to 25 and generate some more. And there we go. It's even more precise now. However, if we go to this one, you'll see that we ended up with less detail and it's trying to follow our 3D model a little bit better. If I just click on this side by side, you'll see how well preserved my 3D model is. And I can actually pick some ideas of what I can see to keep improving my design. I honestly want a little bit more of detail on my overall environment. So I'm going to take this creativity level to 40 and I'm going to just get rid of this materials that I want to see really. And I'm going to go ahead and produce 3 more. And I think I'm going to be sticking with this one. This one looks great. I really like the lighting. The sports car looks awesome. And there's also nice contrast between the green areas and the architecture. I love the blue sky. You can really see the geometry of our design. And it has even actually enhanced this detail of how our design at this point blends in nicely with the geometry at the right side. The only thing that we might need to fix is this back wall that we have in here. But we can actually just Photoshop it out using this other image, so a little bit of matte painting will do. And that is another workflow that you can pick up. Just produce a bunch of images with PromeAI and use matte painting in order to get the best of each one. That was PromeAI's detail tool in action. What do you think of the results? If you want to try it for your own projects, the link is below. And if you like the Rhino model or the prompt we used, you'll find it on our Patreon. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.